Hey guys, it's Tiffany Rice, and I'm so happy because today I have my good friend Karen Peabody, who is a... Karen, do you want to say?
I'm a therapist. I'm a social worker, and I own a private practice in East Bridgewater, Forgeball Solutions, and we primarily deal with people with trauma and substance abuse, but we see kids, we deal with all sorts of people there.
And that's East Bridgewater, Massachusetts, right?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so the reason why I invited Karen on today was because when I give readings, a lot of times we deal with emotional trauma, and we don't realize we even have that. So Karen, when people say emotional trauma, because we hear it so often, what does that actually mean?
You know, I think that it has an interesting history that before we used to think of emotional trauma, we just used to think of PTSD, and that's post-traumatic stress disorder. And that would kind of coincide maybe 20 years ago with wartime activity or an airplane crash or a big car crash. But there was so much in between that we were kind of missing through that definition that in the last 20 years, there's been some really exciting developments that talk about regular stuff that happens in people's lives that really do start to create traumas for people. You know, of course, the bullying stuff, the divorce, all the stuff that a lot of people can relate to, we know are something in people's lives, but now we're kind of looking at it like anything that causes you to like think about yourself differently, think about the world differently, has the potential to create trauma.
So let me get this straight. Because just like you said, a lot of times I feel that when people hear the word emotional trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, it's from maybe a first responder or someone dealing with something that's so severe, but it actually could be part of our everyday life, like a divorce or maybe a loss.
Yeah.
I know when I give readings and people are in the deep stages of grief, a lot of times it doesn't matter if it's an individual that's passed 6 years ago, 6 months ago, or even 6 days ago. That grief is still prevalent and it still hurts. So how would one, I guess, you know, I've learned that you develop almost imprints of these emotions in your body, and it almost kind of restricts your body from moving in different ways. And people can actually feel pain, physical pain of grief. So where are the prime locations that people would probably normally feel that?
You know, I think it's different for most people. There's a lot of truth to what you were kind of saying. There was a study that came out that's called, the acronym is ACE, you know, but it's Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And after that, it's just a 10 question questionnaire, yes or no, like did you experience these certain things, and it's about like, did you move around a lot, was a parent incarcerated, did you get divorced, like things like that. And what they've kind of found out from that is the higher your ACE score, so you get 1 point for every yes, no points for a no. The higher your ACE score, the more likely you are to have, it almost doubles your rate for cancers, strokes, cardiovascular diseases. You know,
wow, because you're holding on to it.
it's stored in your body, you know, and there's a huge explanation of how that kind of happens, but, you know, things that happen are stored in your body. So we don't know. We have zero risk factor people, you know, 45 years old that have a stroke, and they have zero risk factors, not a smoker, not a drinker, you know, no kind of physical history in their family of these kind of things. But what isn't asked is, you know, do you have any adverse childhood experiences that would cause some of these things to happen, even though we know that they're connected. So we don't know like what comes up for people and why, except for the fact of, you know, there are certain type of therapies that are very good to really do this. And we also have no emotional, we have no like executive functioning connection, like, oh wow, I feel these kind of things, it must be because of like my parents were divorced, so they fought chronically as a child. Like there's no connection.
Right, and I don't think that would be your first thought. Like,
no.
Oh, okay. But there are ways to heal. So as far as feeling like locations, I know that going through yoga, I do yoga I'm an avid yogi
We
now,
were there
right?
this morning.
Right. We were doing yoga this morning, and I always talk about my hips. My hips being like the prime space of just a lot of trauma, and it doesn't have to be that I got knocked down when I played field hockey or I have an existing old injury. It was just where I stored a lot of my emotional trauma. So a funny story, which I've shared with you, is that I was actually doing a particular pose, and part of it was for me to reach back and grab my leg, and I couldn't do it, right? I know, never say never, but for some reason I just couldn't do it. And I kept on trying, and then I had talked to Karen about, well, I just don't understand why I can't get this pose down. And she said, Tiff, it's because that's where all your emotional trauma is stored. So with knowing that, my next class I went in and I went to go do the pose where I reached back to grab for my leg and I couldn't do it. And I'm like, it's an emotional trauma. I know it is. So I said very clear in my mind, I said, all right, I release it all. I release it all. So once I said that, literally, I reached back, grabbed my foot, and I had no problem because there's a lot of mind over matter. Now, I know dealing with grief, it's not just something you can turn it on and off. However, you can learn to process by using particular coping mechanisms, which you help people out with, dealing with their traumas. So how would you go about helping people out with that?
We have various therapies. They're not traditional talk therapies, though a therapeutic alliance, you need to feel safe to do this kind of stuff. So we do a little talk therapy to kind of make therapeutic alliances, but there's a lot of people in the office that specialize in brain spotting and gentle reprocessing and EMDR. So we use all of that stuff, but we certainly also recommend to people, yoga is a wonderful practice. Like the whole art of yoga, all of the positioning is to prepare you for meditation, which is Shavasana, the last pose of yoga. Probably a little bit Americanized. We've lost like the whole theory behind it, you know, but in yoga, people have an opportunity to experience their bodies in different ways. And I think just that art of itself, like when you push through the emotional junk drawer of the body, your hip kind of pain, then we start to realize like, oh wow, like I'm not deficient in this kind of way. There are things I can do if I set my intentions, if I really think about it. You know, we don't really believe in like pushing past certain things, but we believe in kind of, you know, bringing your awareness to certain things to give it more understanding and almost give it more room, not be judgmental about like, oh, I can't do this pose, you know, because my hip just doesn't work or I'm too old to do this, but really like leaning into our pain, our emotional pain, our physical pain, and exploring it a little bit more, because like everything means something. We're so quick to say like, don't feel that, don't think that way, and sometimes I think some of that in and of itself causes some problems.
I get it so much because a lot of the people that come to me will say that they get it from whether it's their family members or their friends, like, well, that person's been gone, you should be getting over it now, you should be moving on, you should. No. Everybody handles grief so differently, and that process is your journey. And just like Karen said, whether you choose to maybe talk about it through talk therapy, maybe it's physical, which I think you need to do both in order to properly heal yourself. Do a yoga journey. I know even there's some days I get it and some days I don't, where I can do these poses and I'm right on top, and then there's some poses where I will fall, and that's just the energy that I have for that day. But it is a particular journey, and it's whatever is going to resonate with you. So whether it's talk therapy, whether it's yoga, combining that, whether it's running, I can't tell you how many times people have said, just run it off.
Yeah.
You know?
And interesting enough, though, about that, like, if we were going to speak about that clinically, you know, some of the things we do, we use bilateral stimulation to do some of the treatment that we offer. So that's just holding two things that vibrate back and forth. What that does is it ignites both hemispheres of your brain at the same time. You're able to kind of connect to different other parts of your brain doing it. It's pretty interesting. But people like say like, oh, running is my therapy and everything. And they're probably onto something, because they are using bilateral stimulation while they run, and they're able to process. You can connect with your amygdala part, which is kind of a storage area for emotional health, while you're running. So there is some therapeutic value in it, but like I can't run. Like I don't know.
Right.
It just doesn't really work for everybody.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. So I mean, if someone was to come to you and they just say, you know, Karen, I am in deep grief and I don't know where to go from here. Like, I just feel like I can't get out of bed. All I want to do is just stay there, and I can't eat. I can't do anything. I'm just existing. What would be, in your opinion, what would be something that you would, because I've had that happen with people, and I always say start by breathing and just focus on one breath at a time.
Yeah, so it really depends on when it happened, right? You know, if their loss was yesterday, I would say do this. You know, I think Oprah's the one who said for significant losses, you get 30 days to lie in bed and cry and do what you need to do. You know, you actually need to feel this loss.
Yep.
And it takes about 30 days. And then, you know, it's like little by little, like you really do have to remind yourself, like, okay, what do people do? My world is completely different now. What do normal people do? They get up and they brush their teeth, you know, or they have a cup of coffee, or they shower. Like I almost think like life goes minute to minute, you know, and it is so important to go through the process. Like grief, especially, grief is its unique own entity, you know, and then I actually think like loss of a child versus a husband or a spouse or a friend, like they're all different.
Different levels, I'm sure, because the bond is different.
Yeah,
they
totally
both
different.
Satisfy a different area of your life.
Right. So I think that needs to be a little bit taken in consideration too. I do not like the saying time heals all wounds. I think you get used to your wounds, you know.
Right. It's learning to, just like I say to them, their loved ones are still here in spirit, but it's learning to love them in a different way.
Yeah, and learning to live your life here in a different way, which is incredibly painful. I'm not good with the time, so you tell me. Can I share a little story?
Sure.
I don't really.
Yeah.
You know, like,
no, that's
I'm a therapist,
fine.
so I don't talk. But I have my own grief story. So my father died when I was 22, and that was probably the most devastating thing. We were very close. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment together. We didn't have much money at the time, and so his death was earth-shattering. And frankly, too much for me to handle. So I certainly did a month in bed. And I think I even tried to go back to work and like then came out again. And like just, it wasn't, I don't know. I didn't have enough skills. I was 22 years old. That was not going to work. So what ended up happening is I just needed to live a different life. You know, the life that I had that he was in was too painful to keep going on without him. So, you know, I kind of, you know, just did things very different than what I would do. And like, I broke up with my long-term boyfriend, who was a really nice guy. I found another guy, not that he wasn't nice, but he was very different. I was racked with grief, so I was looking for him to save me from my grief.
Looking for that hope.
Yeah. And I was completely ignoring my grieving process because I couldn't do it, just jumping into something exciting with the main purpose of, you are going to save me from my grief. Not being able to look at other very obvious signs of why we were not a good match. We were not a good match. And that went on for a couple of years. So by the time it was all said and done, I had lost everything now. I think that's what the universe had to kind of do to me. I had no car, no money, no house, no anything, and was back in my mother's house.
Is
not
this
even in my.
I think she's sharing my
I know.
story. This is
not like not even in my bedroom. I was in my brother's bedroom because my bedroom was being rented out by a stranger.
So that's the difference there, because I'm like, wait a minute, Karen, you're telling my story. It's not yours. We're so much alike. It's really crazy. I had to
lose everything. And like now, not only did I have to go get through the grief of losing this relationship, but now I never finished the grief process for my father. So here I am, back to square one. Everything that I tried to like avoid, I'm back to square one. And I can remember getting up, and being like, okay, what do normal people do? You know, what do? I had no car, no money. I didn't even tell people I was home. I lived out of state at the time I came home. And I was like, they walk. And that's what I did. That I didn't have any money, I didn't have any car. I don't even know if I had a phone. And I walked, and I actually walked out in front of your house because I live down the street.
We're at my house.
And every day I just walked. It was probably like 3 miles, and like then I think, you know, things started to like, you know, I got a car back and I got some money, and then I went to the gym, and that worked for me. I didn't talk.
Baby steps.
Yeah.
It's baby steps, and that's what it is learning to just. I used to always tell people, oh, it's one day at a time. Just take it one day at a time. And the reality is no, it's one breath at a time.
Yeah, sometimes
you do what you can do.
But you have to go through it. Like, it's always going to come back to you if you decide, like, oh, no, I just want to feel something else. Oh, I met this, like, great guy. And like, I think in a matter of, like, 2-3 months, I changed my whole life. And I was living with this guy. And, like, I was pretending that I was really sad, you know? And just trying to ignore the whole thing. And it just created more problems for me.
So it's very important to be vulnerable and allow yourself to feel that. And I know we talked today about the importance of mentally keeping yourself in check and physically keeping yourself in check. And, you know, maybe there's a group that you can find. There's so many people that are going through very similar experiences. So whether you reach out to someone or you learn to, you know, celebrate your loved one. Maybe it's something that you do on a daily basis. Maybe write a memory about them or how they made you feel. Maybe it's going to plant a lilac bush. Maybe it's going to plant a tree. Maybe it's going to go sit by the ocean that they used to like to sit with you at. There's a lot of different ways that you can still go through the grief process and feel like you're, as I always say, we're never truly alone, because we're not. Our loved ones are always here with us, but they would want you to continue on by going through the process and healing yourself, and they're constantly going to be sending you so many signs and infinite love all the time. I know for me, on a spiritual level, I always say pay attention to the butterflies, the dragonflies, the hawks, the cardinals, blue jays, all of those, even more. There's some people have said that their loved one comes through as a frog or through as a ladybug. So there's so many different signs, pennies and dimes from heaven, all of those. However, make sure you treat yourself like number one when you're going through this process, because they would want you to do this, and it's healthy for you to do that. And again, whether it's yoga or going to therapy, maybe both, I highly recommend. Maybe it's going out for a run, or maybe it's joining that group or creating a foundation in their memory. I think that's such a beautiful idea for especially parents. I hear parents all the time creating foundations for their son or daughter that they lost, and it's something to help them therapeutically, and it's giving them a voice. It's giving them a voice on feelings, and you don't realize how many people you're actually reaching out and touching and helping along the way. So, Karen, I want to thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And I would love to have you back. We would have to do a live video so you guys can have some questions, because I know there's a bunch of questions and I know you can relate. And if you want to get in touch with Karen, please go find her at 412 Solutions, located in East Bridgewater, Massachusetts. And it's her shop. I call, because I have my shop, but it's her therapy shop. Yeah, that's what you call it. That's what you call it. And I do a lot of workshops with Karen as well. So if you want any information, you can always contact her going to 412solutions.com. And of course, you can find me, Tiffany Rice, at tiffanyrice.com. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. We'd love your feedback. And thank you so much for tuning in and watching us today. And I'm sure I will come back with more guests and more things for us to talk about. So until next time, guys, always remember, we are never truly alone.